Hi, everyone. Welcome to the VAK Indian History Podcast. I'm Utkarsh.
Namaskar, Sumedha from Switzerland. And Utkarsh, where have all your guitars gone? They've gone to one side of the room. It's all looking changed. What's up? What happened?
Oh, I'm not in Singapore. I'm in Switzerland. I'm in the next room. Don't you know?
Okay. I'll just walk out and say hi in a bit.
No, no, no. So I have found myself with the difficult problem of trying to fit my entire guitar collection in one room.
Oh my
And
God,
what
first world problems.
real first world problem? I mean, in context of the other problems the world is facing right now, really not, let's not call it a problem. Let's call it intellectual stimulation.
Okay.
So, anyways, this is a
Okay.
solution.
So your room is
So
all changed.
my room is now a guitar library, but no one's
I
allowed to borrow
see.
anything except
Oh,
people I know.
okay, okay. A library which defies the very definition of a library. Great. Very nice. But
Well, that's
I'm
how we do
glad
it.
you've mentioned library because what are we going to talk about today?
That was a very
Stories.
smooth segue, not planned,
Yes.
but very smooth
Yes.
nonetheless.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about some of the first things I ever borrowed or took from any library or even thought about in that kind of context. Um, Fairy tales or fables, or very specifically, something that we were talking about.
Utkarsh, fairy tales. I somehow don't see you snuggling up with Cinderella or Snow White. Did you?
Maybe when I was three,
You
I know
did?
I started reading fairly. I have no idea. You would know better. I don't know
No,
what I was reading when I was
no,
three.
I don't remember you reading Cinderella or Snow White at all. No.
Yeah. Snow White is also a difficult topic to get into these days, so we'll keep that aside.
Yes, yes, yes. Although, Disney will come up, but okay, not in the Snow White way, but
Not
Disney
in
will
this
definitely.
context. This is
Yes,
the only video about Disney this month without talking about Snow White. Yeah.
yes.
But what I did want to talk about is something I really liked when I was younger, and I still like it. It kind of has that place, which is the Arabian Nights, right?
Ah,
Everything
yes.
to do with Sindbad the Sailor, Aladdin, all of these things. Um, we think some of these things we think about as Disney characters, but they're not. They're much older stories. They're very interesting stories. I think Disney kind of Disneyfied it to some extent, but the actual stories are more interesting to me, at least as a reader versus a watcher of movies. And I was talking with you about this with you the other day, which is why we are having this podcast. And I was very surprised to hear that, much like so many things that we've talked about in this podcast, the Arabian Nights do indeed have an Indian connection and potentially even an Indian origin. And as always, I said, okay, don't tell me more. This is what the camera needs to be on for. So I guess that's where we'll start our conversation today.
Yes. So, are the Arabian Nights actually the Indian Nights? Most emphatically, yes. It has a
That's a bold statement.
it's a bold statement, but I hope that in the next, whatever, half an hour, 1 hour, I'll be able to
Hmm.
justify this bold statement and give you enough
Okay.
evidence so that
Hmm.
you'll also, at the end of this podcast, be convinced about this bold statement that I am making.
Hmm.
Stories, although, are a little slippery in the sense that they change forms as they move from one landscape to another, from one cultural, religious landscape, one geography to another. They do change, but there are some elements which remain the same. And it's an actual, there are actual ways of analyzing these stories, and there are people who work with them. So there has been a lot of work done on this. But let me
Hmm.
start with what do I always start with? Whenever I'm talking about Indian stuff, I always go back to the Rig Veda.
Hmm.
And so will I go back to the Rig Veda again. There is something in the Rig Veda which is called the Gatha Narshansi. So what is it? It is stories about normal people. Because we have our epics, we have our
Hmm.
Itihas, Puran. They
Hmm.
are
Hmm. Hmm.
about devtas,
Hmm.
gods,
Hmm.
larger than life heroes, Sri
Hmm.
Ram
Hmm.
or Sri Krishna. But
Hmm.
these stories or these akhyans are about, normal people, people like you and
Okay.
me. So there is this little seed in the Rig Veda, and then there is a very strong story tradition in India, which is called the Brihat Katha or the Badkaha. So there are three story
Have we?
clusters.
I've heard this. I mean, I must have heard it on this podcast
Yes,
because there's nowhere else I would
yes.
hear this. Brihat, when did we talk about it?
No, we must have talked about the Brihatkatha tradition also when we were talking about the Ramayana and the
Ah,
transmission of the Ramayana story. Because
Ah,
these
yes, that
are,
episode.
yes, remember
Yeah,
I had said that there are
yeah.
three story clusters,
Yes, yes, yes.
the
Correct, correct.
Ramayana, the
Yeah,
Mahabharata, and the Brihat
yeah,
Katha.
yeah.
So these three
Hmm,
story clusters originated thousands of years ago in the Indian subcontinent and made
hmm.
their way across to almost all parts of the world. And
I
we'll
see.
see how they did go to all parts of the world. In India
Hmm,
itself,
hmm,
the
hmm.
original Brihat Katha or Bad Kaha, which was written in a Prakrit language, is lost. But we have many recensions and versions of it. The most famous is the Katha Sarit Sagar in Sanskrit, written by Somdev in Kashmir in the 10th century. Other than that,
Okay.
we also have the original one was called the Brihat Katha of Gunadhya. So the
Hmm, hmm.
original compiler or writer of these stories is Gunadhya. He has origin as a gun of Lord Shiva, and he was sent down to earth because of some sin that he had done. And there's a very good, very interesting origin story, which any of you can read. You can read any of the translations, which I'll mention later. So you have the Brihat Katha Manjari, written by Shemendra again in Kashmir. You have Tamil versions, the Perun Kottai. You have the Brihat Katha Lok Sangrah in Nepal. You also have the Vasudev Hindi, which is written in Maharashtrian Prakrit. So these are the versions of these stories. Why am I mentioning all of them? Because these provide us with the original versions of the stories, which you will later find in the Arabian Nights. And I'll try and tell
So,
you how
so
they
that's
actually
very
reach
interesting.
there.
So we know, again, not talking, trying to make this again about dating the Rig Veda. We've talked about this. So you're saying these stories have an origin in that period, which
Yes,
is
yes, yes, yes.
significantly older than what we would think about as the typical golden age of Arabia, where all of these stories come from.
Oh, much older, Utkarsh. So the golden age of Arabia, around say 8th, 9th, 10th, so Harun al-Rashid was in Baghdad, he was the Khalifa. So this was supposed to be the so-called golden age of Arabia. But the golden age of Arabia depended a lot on stuff that they were importing from India. And this meant all kinds of intellectual stuff also. Remember chess? Remember the Hindu numerals?
Yes.
Remember algebra? Remember algorithms?
Yeah.
So all these things, and in a minute I will open a map and try to share it. By the way, deepest apologies for the way in which some of our Zoom shares failed last time, Utkarsh. Those technical problems were pretty unfortunate. I think people would not have been able to see the
Hmm.
images we
Hmm.
wanted them to see. Well,
Hmm.
fingers crossed. Let's hope it works properly this time.
Hmm.
So, these stories are supposed to, the Arabian Nights, for example, is dated around the 8th century of the Common Era. But what time am I talking about? I am talking about 6th century before the Common Era, 8th century before the Common Era. That is around the time when Gunadhya is said to have written that, either the 6th century before the Common Era or at the turn of the millennium, because he is also very strongly associated with a certain dynasty called the Satvahanas or the Satkarnis. And there is a particular king over there who is called Satvahana. So this is much before that, Utkarsh, at least 1,000 years before that. So these stories, what are these stories about? They are about normal people, good, bad, ugly, everything. There are no ideals here. So you have the intellectual Brahmin, you also have the merchant, you have gamblers, you have prostitutes, you have pimps, you have thieves, you have fighting father-in-laws and daughter-in-laws, you have adultery, you have everything good and bad mixed together. It's a reflection of society. And it's a reflection of society in all its diversity. So you have people from all walks of life, although some are represented a little more. Remember Sindbad? What was he? He was a sailor. So people who are voyaging across the seas or voyaging across land also are represented to a very great degree. To a great extent, it's all about quests. People start out, maybe a young man, maybe a young woman, maybe somebody who has been given a raw deal by fate. They start out, they meet with magical beings, they meet with troubles, they meet with good luck, and in the end, normally they find their fortune. But Utkarsh, there are always also stories where they end up becoming bigger fools than they were. So you cannot categorize these stories. It has almost everything you can think of. So then you may well ask me, the first thing, of course, is how? How did they reach there? So again, for that, let me first try and share a map, and then I'll tell you a few things. So then again, just give me a minute while I open the map. So are you able to see this map? You
Yes,
can see,
I can see the
yeah.
map.
And can you read, or should I just make it a bit bigger? The Periplus of
It's
the
quite large
Erythraean
for
Sea?
me,
Okay.
but I do have a 22-inch screen in front of me, so difficult to.
So
You can
anyway,
make it a
you
touch
can,
bigger. Yeah, I
okay,
can make it out very well.
okay, let me try. Okay, so that's a touch bigger. Now you can see in front of you India. You can see Southeast Asia. You can see China. You can also see Arabia. You can see Africa. And if you just go to the northwestern part of the map, you can also see beginnings of Europe.
So
And
these names are very interesting.
yes,
Are they from an Asterix comic?
no, they're not. So these were made by a Greek sailor in the first century CE. The Periplus is kind of, the periphery.
I
So this
see.
is the periphery of the Indian Ocean. So you can see the Indian Ocean, and you can see the periphery of the
Hmm.
Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
And this sailor was making a list of all the ports that
Hmm.
the ships used to sail to. Now, the ships
Okay.
sailed with lots of commodities, but they also sailed with stories. They also sailed with people, with
Hmm.
ideas, with knowledge. And we've had
Hmm.
occasion to talk about this so many times. Remember when we were talking about calculus and
Yeah.
how it went to Europe? This is the route that it follows. There were shipping routes which went to the Arabian Peninsula. So you can
Hmm.
see all the important places of the Arabian Peninsula. It is still important, that Arabian Peninsula. And a little above the Arabian Peninsula, somewhere, can you see my mouse? Somewhere over here today is Syria, this place. Syria and Aleppo. They are very, very, Aleppo is a very ancient city. So
Of
Aleppo
course.
was
Yeah.
another place from where a lot of things went off to Greece. This was another
Hmm.
path
Hmm.
from Arabia to Greece. Now, I've shown you the transmission channels from India to Arabia to Africa to Persia. So, note these two things. Note Persia here and note Arabia here. And note Greece over here. I'll show you another map which will make things
Hmm.
a little more clear. I want you to have a kind of idea of what we are looking at. So, I don't know whether let's see, I hope I can access the other ones also. This is the same map, but yeah. Can you now see Syria? This is a normal,
Actually, I can't see anything at all right now. Okay, now I see it. I see it now. Yeah.
so it is the same map in a modern context. I've just opened it on Google Maps. So look at
Hmm. Hmm.
the Arabian Peninsula, look at Persia, which is now Iran, and then look
Yeah.
at Syria, Aleppo, look at
Yeah.
Turkey, and look at
Yeah.
Egypt, and look at
Yeah.
Greece. And
Yes.
from Greece, you enter into Europe,
Hmm.
the other different countries of
Hmm.
Europe.
Hmm.
So these stories traveled from India to Persia to Arabia, and some things traveled to Syria and Utkarsh, because you want to know about Sindbad, don't forget Syria. So we have versions of these stories from all these countries, all of them.
Hmm.
And this is how they went. To get an idea of the ways in which people and ideas and stories moved. So what happened was that these stories went through along with the items which were
Trade
being
routes.
traded. Yes,
Hmm.
they went along
Hmm.
the trade routes
Yeah.
and they reached Arabia and Persia. How was the Katha Sarit Sagar? How did it become the Arabian Nights? So there is a certain encyclopedia of the Arabian Nights which I read through and through and came up with a lot of information. In Persia, this became something which is called the Hazar Afsane. Hazar Afsane means, of
1,000.
course, thousand stories.
Hmm.
So this was written in Old Persian. And this Hazar Afsane became the Alf Layla, the Thousand Nights in Arabia, in Arabic. How do we know
Hmm.
all this? Because there is a Arabic historian called Al-Masudi. He mentions this in the 8th century.
These 1,000 stories, is there a one-to-one correlation, or are there other stories added on top for flavor?
No, so I'll tell you a little bit more
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
do you want to talk about the European connection right now, or should we start talking about the stories?
So I would be very interested to know, the historical part of it is obviously fascinating also, but I'm very interested to know the famous stories that we are all familiar with: Sindbad, Aladdin, and any others that you feel bear particular mention.
Hmm.
What is the original story, and where was it actually set, or any sort of color that you can give to the original
Hmm.
story and how it turned into the story that we know? And who knows, maybe 300 years later people will just remember the Aladdin movie and they'll
Hmm.
forget that it was from somewhere before, right? They will be like whole new world and all those
Yeah.
songs. So kind of stories evolve. So what do we know
Yes.
about the original story? You can start with any of the stories that you want.
So, very, a very pertinent question, and in fact, you have bunched three of these stories together, which have
Hmm.
a slightly separate origin.
So we
So
can choose
they've
anyone. Yeah.
no, all three of them, in fact, have a similar origin. So I've
Okay.
told
Okay.
you that we know about the Arabian Nights from the
Hmm.
Hazar
Hmm.
Afsane, but this
Yeah.
Aladdin,
Hmm.
Alibaba, and Sindbad, three
Ah,
very,
Alibaba,
very,
of course.
yeah,
How did I forget Alibaba?
yeah,
Yes.
three very, very popular stories. So
Hmm.
the first time they made an appearance in the Arabian Nights collection of stories was
Hmm.
only in 1704. And this was done by a French translator. He translated the Arabic stories into French. And
Okay.
he put in these three stories. His name was Antonio Galland. Now he put in these three stories in French for the first time in the Arabian Nights. Where did he get these from? He got these from an oral tradition in Aleppo. So he was in Aleppo. He got this from a Syrian Christian, a storyteller who had an oral tradition of stories, and he added this to the Arabic Arabian Nights, the Alf Layla, and that is how these three stories were added onto the Alf Layla,
So they were
coming from
not part of the
Syria.
original thousand.
They were
Uh,
not part, yes, they were not
and these
part
are the
of,
most famous ones, at least
yes,
today.
yes.
Interesting.
Very interesting. And
Yeah.
see, again, when I read this, then I tried to trace the path of these three stories. Where did these three stories come from? And how did they arrive in Syria? So, for that, one, of course, we have to know that there was a very close connection between India and Syria, that is the old city of Aleppo, ever since Mauryan times. There was a lot of trade, there was a lot of movement. In fact, Indian artifacts have been found in Aleppo, and there was a movement of stories also. Now, how do we know that these stories have any connection with our Katha Sarit Sagar or Brihat Katha tradition? Isn't that the question that you really want to ask? Yes. So let's take the story of, say, Aladdin.
Let's go with Aladdin for the
Yeah.
clicks, since everybody
Yes.
loves him.
Yeah. So Aladdin is this young man who lives in a city, and he is not very well off. And then an evil uncle comes, tries to use him for something, fails, and then, Aladdin gets that lamp and he gets that genie, and then he has a lot of adventures. He marries a princess, etc., etc. So, what is the important thing in this story? The important thing is this young man who has evil uncle, but through the evil uncle, he gets some riches or some abilities which propel him into becoming a very rich man. Now,
Not the genie. Does it have to be a genie?
it has to, it has to be something supernatural. It
Something
normally,
supernatural.
either
Okay.
something supernatural, or there is another set of stories about a father-son duo of con men who
Okay.
go around conning people, and
Okay.
they do things with their own intellect.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
like I told you, there are all kinds of stories. Now, this
Yeah.
Aladdin story, there is a story of somebody called Varruchi in the Katha
Okay.
Sarit Sagar. So, Varruchi is a young man living with his mother, similar to Aladdin, and not too well off. He has two evil uncles, three evil uncles actually, not one. He has three evil uncles.
So
Those evil
Cinderella had all
uncles,
those evil stepsisters. He has the evil uncles.
stepsisters, yeah. So,
Yeah.
and those three evil uncles come and, the same thing happens. They try to con him out of something, but he succeeds in beating them. He actually goes to Patliputra and he does not marry a princess precisely, but Varruchi gains knowledge. He becomes one of the foremost grammarians and important people and a minister in the Patliputra court. So
Hmm.
he is a real person who has written a lot about Sanskrit grammar, but he has this supernatural story associated with him, and he marries this beautiful woman called Upakosa. Upakosa has another cycle of stories around her, which you will find from India to Arabia in the Arabian Nights. You'll find stories like that. You will find it in the Persian version. You will find it in Turkey. You will also find it in Europe. So there is a parallel in the stories.
Hmm.
Young man, magical help, evil forces, but he overcomes all that, and in the end, he becomes somebody rich. Now, the interesting things about Aladdin, I mean, was obviously the lamp, and the flying
Yeah.
carpet, the lamp and the flying carpet.
And
So
the
the
genie.
and the
The
genie.
jinn.
So these
Yeah.
three are straight out of the Katha Sarit Sagar or the Brihat Katha tradition. All
Okay.
the stories in the Brihat Katha, they have these magical articles. So either it's a shoe which you put on and you can fly, or
Hmm.
just the idea of flying. Do you remember the podcast we did on Vimans, Utkarsh?
Yes.
When I had
Yes.
spoken about all the stories of flying that are
Hmm.
there in the Brihat Katha. So the
Yeah.
idea of getting a magical article through which you fly in the air and you do a lot of things, especially enter into the apartment of princesses who are
Yeah.
otherwise kept very guarded. These
Yeah.
ideas come straight from the Brihat Katha, these magical articles. Now, also
Okay.
in the Brihat Katha, you have, see, I'm calling it the Brihat Katha, but it has many names, but it's referred to as the Brihat Katha tradition. So, in the Brihat Katha tradition, you have a whole series of these supernatural beings. What kind of supernatural beings do we have in India? We have Vetal. You remember the Vikram and Vetal stories? So, Vetal is what?
Of
Vetal
course.
is a kind of vampire. And by the way, there is good enough evidence to show that our favorite vampire, that's Dracula. The vampire tradition also is because it has originated the Vetal, and the stories about the Vetal went there to Romania. So the vampire tradition and so many of today's modern movies about vampires have their basis in this Vetal.
And
So
that is
you,
a future episode
yes,
of this podcast, apparently, which we just thought of.
yes. So you have this Vetal, or you have a Yaksh, or you have a Gandharv, or you have a Vidyadhar. So these are all different supernatural beings. The Vetal is a kind of, evil thing. It never means anybody any good. But Yaksh can do something very good to you. Yaksh can ask you riddles, and if you answer, then can give you lots of riches. This comes straight from the Mahabharata. Now, there are also Gandharvs who are actually musically gifted beings. The Vidyadhars they have lots of magical powers and they are also highly intellectual people. So, you see, we have what is called in English a polytheistic tradition, Utkarsh. We have a number of gods, goddesses, supernatural beings, powerful supernatural beings. But what is the problem when you shift it to an Islamic background? You don't have a polytheistic tradition. You
Hmm.
have to put all these together in some one being, and that being is the jinn. So the jinn was, see, because supernatural beings exist in every culture. There's no culture which
Yeah.
doesn't have it. So jinn
Yeah.
means someone who is hidden from sight. So
Okay.
all these different supernatural agencies through which so many things were given to our heroes and heroines and
Yeah.
villains, etc., that became the jinn. And the association of that jinn with a particular object, a ring, a lamp, a shoe, a stick, a scepter, anything. That kind of story. Now, in the Katha Sarit Sagar, there are literally hundreds of stories. It was translated by C.H. Toney, and it has gone into 10 volumes in English. So the number of stories is just too many. But so I'm trying to take out the
Yeah.
gist of those stories.
Two questions are coming to mind. One question
Hmm.
is, so the specific idea of a jinn giving you wishes, is that
Yes.
articulated in
Yes.
the
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
And the
Yes.
second
Yes.
thing is, what you mentioned earlier is these stories are supposed to be stories about real people. They're not about all these heroes and
Yeah.
great people.
By
So why do we have
real
so
By
yeah?
real, I don't mean historical figures, not all of them, although many of them
No,
are
no, no,
actually
as in
Indian
real life.
historical figures, as
Let
in
me
real.
reframe it
Yeah,
as real life.
yeah,
So
yeah,
why do we
yeah.
have so much supernatural in real life in these real life stories?
Yes, because
So
there is the element and the enchantment of magic in these stories. These are
hmm,
supposed to be for what? These are supposed to be for entertainment, Utkarsh.
okay,
And when they are for entertainment, all entertaining stories will should have some stunning elements, some shocking elements. If it's a
I
very
see.
run-of-the-mill story, it's not that exciting. So,
I see.
isn't magic a part of all the most popular stories in the world?
Let's see, Harry Potter. Yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah. So, magic is a part of the, what can I say? It is in contrast, rather, to the mundaneness of life. So, how does a normal person become a prince or a rich man or a rich merchant? How does this happen? Happens through some supernatural powers which intervene. So, therefore, you have this whole idea of a young man like Aladdin who gets some supernatural help and then becomes a rich, happy, prosperous man with a beautiful wife. Remember, the beautiful wife slash beautiful, handsome husband is absolutely necessary. So this is as far as our friend Aladdin is concerned. Now Sindbad is even more interesting because Sindbad has one very important element of the Kathasarit Sagar or the Brihat Katha, that is voyages, and that too sea voyages. Most of the stories of the Brihat Katha tradition involve somebody going in a ship somewhere else across the oceans. And this is a very old tradition in India, although Utkarsh, I'm not sure if you are aware of it. But the fact that India is, it's an island nation. We are strictly speaking a peninsula, but if you think of it, we
Of
have
the
a lot
Himalayas
of,
as a, yeah,
yeah,
it blocks a
yeah.
lot of the top. Yeah.
Yeah, but we have three parts of the country. On two sides of the country, you have the
Yep.
ocean. So we are more or less an island nation. So
Hmm.
throughout thousands of years, we have relied on sea voyages, also land voyages, but mostly sea voyages for our connections with other
Hmm.
nations.
That makes sense.
Why
Yeah.
we have forgotten all this is that after Islam came to us through the land, and
Hmm.
colonization came to us through the land, through the northwest.
Hmm.
And when their ideas were all trained towards, for example, the Brits, they looked to their own country, therefore, they looked to the Northwest and towards Europe.
Hmm.
The people who came from Central Asia or the other Islamic people who came from Arabia or Persia, they also looked to
Hmm.
the same side. So the fact that India is an island nation was forgotten. And then somehow this very untrue kind of thing came up that there has been a prohibition on sea voyages for Hindus. Absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. Indians have been
Hmm.
sea voyagers forever and ever, and the first type of ships, the stitch ships, were used to
Okay.
traverse the ocean.
Where
Now,
did this
when,
idea come from? Because I haven't heard of it. Maybe it's a good thing I haven't heard of it. What is this
yes,
idea that?
yes, so this came about mostly in the period of empire, when yes, there
Okay.
was a certain dislike for people, or people were discouraged from traveling mostly to the UK, because it was felt that they were getting to be too anglicized. So
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
some people made up a lot of things, that this was written in this Manusmriti and this was written here and this was written there. And
Hmm.
some people in those times, that is the 18th and 19th century, did write down such provisions, but they do not
Hmm.
exist in the Indian Shastras. There is no such prohibition.
Okay.
In fact, ever since the time of the Rig Veda, Indians have been seafarers. And if I can, later, I will send a picture to you of the oldest type of ships made in
Hmm.
India. We have some illustrations, and maybe you can put it in over here. So I
Okay.
don't have it accessible right now. So anyway, Indians and sea voyages are inseparable. Now, when sea voyages happen, a lot of your prosperity and happiness depends on it. Then a lot of stuff will grow around it. Stories will grow around it. You will have devis and devtas who
Hmm.
will
Hmm.
help you with your sea voyages. For example, there is a very famous epic, South Indian epic called Manimekalai. In that epic, you can see how a sea goddess is worshipped. Then there is
Hmm.
also in Bihar, a very
Hmm.
old sea god has been found who was worshipped before the voyagers actually set out. The ships actually, Manibhadra, I think his name is. There's a
Okay.
huge statue. In short, sea voyages were so important that many stories grew up around them. And these stories are there in the Brihat Katha tradition. So you have this captain of a ship or a sailor who gets into a ship and then finds adventure in the sea. Either his ship runs aground somewhere, or there is some huge wave which takes him up, and then that wave takes him up into a magical realm. Or he goes under the sea, under the ground. He reaches an island, and there are some
Hmm.
fabulous things on that island. Is this reminding you of the Sindbad story?
Oh yeah.
Yes, this is exactly the Sindbad story.
Okay.
All his seven voyages. So Sindbad
Hmm.
had done seven voyages. So
Yeah.
what did he find in those seven voyages? And one of them,
Hmm.
1 minute,
Hmm.
let me just open it. Where had I written it down? So, in the first voyage, I think, yes, he finds an island which is actually a fish. Then in another one, the whale sends up, it's a whale, and it sends up that stream of water, that gushing stream of water,
Yep.
and he is thrown up on that,
Yeah.
and then he goes onto an island, and then he
Yeah.
finds a lot of riches over there. Now,
Yeah.
these are kind of, replicated from the Brihat Katha tradition. So there are many stories there where the king sends his minister on a voyage to get this, that, or the other. And the places, where did they go? A lot of it was to the southeast of Asia. So they went to Suvarnadeep. Suvarnadeep was Indonesia. They went to Yavadeep. Yavadeep was Malaysia. So then there was also a Narikel Deep. There was a Kataha Deep. All the places of Southeast Asia, you can mostly map. Now, these were in Southeast Asia, but if you are living in putting the story in Baghdad, then mostly you cannot have the Southeast Asian settings. So then the settings changed. In fact, some of those settings became traveling to India. So think of Arabia and India, and think of India and Southeast Asia.
Got it. Same
So yeah,
direction.
same direction, and the
Hmm.
same idea of adventure and
Yeah.
getting prosperous and rich through trade and travel.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now I'm going to come to the second voyage of Sindbad. What happens in the second voyage of Sindbad? He gets caught by the sea devil. What is the sea devil? The sea devil is an old man who sits on Sindbad's shoulder and does not let go. It reminds you of something else? Vikram or Betal?
Betal.
Yeah. So there
Yes.
you go. The sea devil of Sindbad is nothing but the Betal of Vikram. And then the second and the third voyage of Sindbad, he is picked up by a very large bird, which is called a roc. And that
Hmm.
large bird picks him up and drops him off somewhere. And then he finds a lot of, sometimes he finds precious stones, sometimes he finds
Hmm.
something else, and then he carries all of it back. And he becomes rich through that. So, where did this idea of a large bird come from? This idea again has been traced back to Garud. Who is Garud? He is the Vahan of
Of
Lord
course, I know
Vishnu.
Garud, but what is the connection to the bird? Like I'm
So,
trying to
so
see.
the so the Garud is a large bird,
Of course, yes.
and this large bird
Hmm.
picks up people, drops them to different places, can fight,
Hmm.
has huge claws, and can do a
Hmm.
lot of damage,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
appears in the Brihat Katha. Now, how does it appear in the Brihat Katha? There is the story, the Brihat Katha actually revolves around the stories and adventures of a king of Kaushambi called Udayan and his son who is called Narvahan Datta. So it is the stories, the adventures, and basically, they end up marrying zillions of women. They have lots of adventures and they end up marrying zillions of women and getting lots of riches, etc.,
Hmm.
etc. But
Hmm.
and they hear stories. The stories are
Hmm.
also interestingly sometimes they're stories either to pep them up if they're depressed or to calm them down if they're too excited and to,
Hmm.
control them.
Hmm.
And before I go any further, I must mention something which I totally missed, Utkarsh. In answer to your original question about how do we
Hmm.
know that Arabian Nights and Brihat Katha are connected? That is
Hmm.
because the structure of the stories is the same. It's a story within a story within a story. That's called the frame story concept. And
Hmm.
that is a totally Indian gift to the world. It originated in India. If you will see, even in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, somebody is talking to somebody else while something is happening and they'll tell them a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
story. In that
Absolutely.
story,
Yeah.
someone will tell them a story. So this is
Hmm.
called frame story.
Hmm.
This is an Indian invention. And this Indian invention is reflected in the Arabian Nights. I'm sure you know that a whole story is going on in which somebody is narrating stories.
Hmm. Hmm.
The princess is narrating stories to the very cruel caliph who wants to kill all women after marrying them.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this frame story way of presenting stories is another one of the very big proofs that the Hazar Afsane and the Alf Laila came from the same origin. So yeah, I was
Hmm.
telling you about Udayan and Narvahan Dutt and the big bird. So basically, the birth of Udayan is connected with his mother being picked up and carried and dumped somewhere else so that Udayan does not grow up in his own father's kingdom but grows up somewhere else.
Hmm.
So, this
Hmm.
idea of a bird picking you up and transporting you somewhere is duplicated in the adventures of Sindbad.
Hmm.
Then you have, underground rivers, caves, elephants who give you they take you to a dead elephant's kind of, a cemetery where you find
Hmm.
so much ivory that you become really rich. All these
Hmm.
stories are there in the Brihat Katha. They are there in the Jatak. The Jataks are stories of Buddha's past lives, and they are also taken from the Brihat Katha tradition. And the Jataks have become really famous. They have traveled everywhere. The Jataks have become Aesop's fables of Greece. There is
Hmm.
a very well documented tradition of uh, somebody of a king sending an Indian king sending
Yeah.
what can I say, an embassy to Emperor Claudius with the
Hmm.
Jatak Katha, and then they went to Rome, and then they went to Greece, and then they became Aesop's fables. So
Hmm.
again, the elements which appear in these stories can be picked out and can be literally mapped to each other.
Hmm.
So that
Hmm.
is why the idea of the jinn is a distillation of all the ideas of supernatural forces put into a very Islamic structure and Islamic belief system. Because, whenever all these stories move anywhere, like I told you, they have to change. The elements will remain the same, but, many things will change.
But
So,
speaking about the stories of the Buddha, even Chinese tradition, there are a lot of stories about Buddha. I'm forgetting what they're called. Uh, Even for the Chinese, because we've talked about Buddhism being spread across Asia. So I'm just wondering
yes, yes.
what is the connection of that?
Maybe we'll,
I'm trying to
with
forget.
the,
There's a name for it because my friend was telling me about it recently.
okay,
Yeah, I'll
so if you remember it, then maybe we can,
yeah, I'll try and remember it. Yeah.
yeah, on Indian, Chinese, Buddhist connections, we need to do a very in-depth kind of thing because
Hmm.
those are even better documented actually.
Yeah.
But again, what I wanted to tell you here is you asked about the jinn. So the jinn is a distillation of supernatural forces put in an Islamic way. What else
Hmm.
happened? So wherever there was a reference to the Vedas, that became a reference to the Quran. So wherever there
Hmm.
was a reference to people like, say, sage Vishwamitra,
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
became a reference to Solomon, son of David.
Hmm.
Then
Hmm.
the whole setting changed from Ujjaini and Patliputra, etc., to Baghdad. Then the
Hmm.
kings over here, Vikramaditya, Uday, and Narvahan Dutt, they became Harun al-Rashid because he was the most famous Khalifa of that time and of that period. So that
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
why when you read the any of the Brihat Katha selections and you read the Arabian Nights, the stories strike you as so common. So, once I had gone to a rendering of Dastan Goi in Delhi. Dastan Goi is a telling of the Arabian Nights tales in a folk kind of fashion. Two, three men sit together and sing it out, and they tell you the story. Dastan is story, so telling of a story.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, all of them, because I have read the Katha Sarit Sagar many times, and in fact, in my own fiction writing, I use a lot of elements from the Katha Sarit Sagar. To me, all those stories were so well known. They were all
Hmm.
the same kind of people, the same elements, the same plot. These are the things which reappear. Now, people who analyze the different plots in the world, for example, C.H. Tawney, like I told you, estimates that 60% of all original plots in the entire world narrative tradition appear in the Brihat Katha.
Wow, that's a pretty large
So
number.
it's a very large number. It's a really
Yeah.
large number. So then, if I tell you that so many things across the world have been influenced by it, it doesn't sound so strange, does it?
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. So Alibaba, not just e-commerce.
Now, Alibaba is again, Alibaba comes from the remember that Syrian storyteller, and Alibaba is not a part of the Hazar Afsane or of the Alf Laila. Alibaba, what is the important thing about it? He's a dumb man, and he has a brother who's very smart. And Alibaba is a dumb fellow, but then one day when he goes to cut wood and he finds that cave and all the
Hmm.
rest of it. Oh,
Yeah.
in passing, Utkarsh, let me mention something. In these stories, not just people, animals, streets, trees, caves, rivers, all have voices and all are alive.
Hmm.
What does that remind us of? That reminds us of Hindu philosophy that all of creation by the creator, everything has an Atma. In the Abrahamic tradition, the only soul, Atma, Ruh is with people, it's with human beings. But for us, everything is alive. So even the caves will speak, the rivers will speak, animals will speak. We'll talk about the Panchatantra where the animals speak. They are the ones who speak. So Ali Baba is a foolish man with a smarter wife, and he has this piece of luck and he gets that cave and etc etc. So this kind of story again, this story has a parallel in the Katha Sarit Sagar about two brothers, and one of the brothers is dumb and is unable to do anything. But in the Katha Sarit Sagar, the dumb brother remains dumb, doesn't get anything much. But in Alibaba, this person really manages to get the help of one very smart woman. Now, this tradition of women who are really smart is another overriding feature of the Brihat Katha tradition. So
Oh,
these
I thought
women,
that came from Portia in Merchant of Venice.
no,
No,
Portia
I'm
and
kidding.
Merchant and Portia and Merchant of Venice is 15th, 16th century. It's
Yeah,
hardly
yeah.
that
I'm
early.
doing it on purpose, but yes.
So, these smart women who are able to outwit others, who are able to use their intellect to solve problems, they are smart, courageous, they can even, like Margina, kill someone. In the end, she takes out that knife and she kills the chief of the robber band. The chief of those 40 thieves is killed by Margina. So again, elements are the same, and the kind of pots in which those 40 thieves are hiding, if you remember the story, where then Margina goes and pours hot oil into those jars and they all die.
Hmm.
So those pots actually have been found artifacts such as those big pots where people can actually go in and a whole human body can sit inside. They have been found in the trade between India and Southeast Asia. So sometimes you find story elements. Sometimes you find actual remains which refer back to these stories. So Alibaba, Aladdin, as well as Sindbad are a very interesting category of stories which were added onto the Arabian Nights, but which have a full tradition which can be traced back to the Indian subcontinent, the Brihat Katha, and also given that they came from Aleppo and there was a link between Aleppo and India, it seems very, very possible that the stories would have gone via a trade route from India to Aleppo. But there's something which I want to tell you,
Hmm.
Utkarsh. Horcrux. Do you know the
Oh,
Horcrux also? Yes, that also has an Indian origin.
eh, what? Okay, that is okay. I only think of it I only think of it from Harry Potter. I can't think of any other folk story. Like wizards are all over the place, witches are all over the place. Those are not J.K. Rowling originals, but I thought the Horcrux was. Okay, tell me
No,
more.
not at all. So there is a series of stories, there are Tuta Mena stories in the Indian tradition and in the Brihat Katha, where there is some very powerful demon, somebody who's really evil, and he is so smart that he takes out his soul and keeps it somewhere else, hides it somewhere else, so that nobody can ever kill him. That exactly is what a Horcrux is.
Yeah, that's
That
exactly what
does
it is.
that's
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So that's those stories you exactly find in the Brihat Katha, where
But
there is
okay,
this.
let me ask you this. This goes back to Abrahamic versus Indian or polytheistic tradition. Like Abrahamic is the one where you have the soul
Hmm,
linking to the human or the living being,
hmm.
whereas in Indian tradition, as we talked about, right, it's the consciousness is kind of universal. So how are you hiding yours?
No,
You
but
can kind of see
no,
the
but
clash.
no, Utkarsh, because Atma is very much there in the Indian tradition. It's not
Okay,
soul, which is a soul is a little piece which has been given to you by God.
okay,
Whereas Atma is a part of that universal consciousness which you share with the Supreme Being. But at the
okay,
same time, it is yours.
okay.
So that is what Advait is, no? You are one. In spite of the fact that there is the supreme consciousness and you are one. Why do
Hmm.
you seem to be two? Because this is the veil of Maya. Once the veil of Maya is removed, then the supreme consciousness will become all one. So right now, for all these stories, of course, they are very much behind the veil of Maya.
Okay, got it. So
Everything
they're
is,
behind the veil of Maya. Okay,
yeah, yeah.
okay, got it.
So they have this Atma and they hide this Atma. And normally they have a beautiful woman or a princess kept under their control, kept captive. And she tells the prince or whoever has come that this
Hmm.
is where you can find this demon's Atma. Go kill that animal or whatever he has hidden it in, and then this demon will die. So the idea of a Horcrux, that means storing your soul somewhere else to save it. How many were there in Harry Potter? Six, seven? I
Uh,
forget.
it has apples of. It's been. When did the last book come out?
Okay,
Because that's when I first read it. Yeah,
long time, long time. So, okay,
yeah,
whether there were three or seven, I forget. But the
yeah.
idea of a Horcrux
Hmm.
comes again from the Indian subcontinent. That's why, the C.H. Tawney's statement that 60% of all plot ideas originate in the Brihat Katha, it's not at all far-fetched. Not far-fetched at all. So this is
Hmm.
what I wanted to tell you, but there was something else which I promised in the trailer. I promised to talk about Shakespeare.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes.
So what is the connection
And I guess
between,
that's why I mentioned Portia because that must have been subliminally put in my mind as well.
yes, yes. So what was the connection between Shakespeare and, 1 minute, let me just open it. There are so many stories and there are so many different names that I really have to keep everything sorted out in terms of what went where and how. But for this, I am also going to open an article by one Mr. Jacob. So you see, from the stories of what is called there's a very famous medieval set of tales which is called the Tales of Bidpai. And what is this Tales of Bidpai? It is the Panchtantra. You've heard of the
Okay,
Panchtantra? The
of
Panchtantra is
course.
a 10th century collection of stories, which is told by a Pandit called Vishnu Sharma to the three very foolish and wastrel princes of a king who wants them to become good rulers. So basically,
Hmm.
this is to teach them everything, all of the wisdom and intellect that is needed to be a king. This is what the Panchtantra is. It was written in the 10th century, Utkarsh. And
Hmm.
stories in the Panchtantra were taken from the Brihat Katha tradition. And this Brihat
Okay.
Katha tradition not just went back to the Vedic corpus in terms of Gatha Narshansi, but you also have tales of animals saying things and providing morals in the Rig Veda itself. So you see, all this has a very deep root. In Europe, this became famous as the Tales of Bidpai.
Hmm.
So from this Tales of Bidpai, you also get the tale of the three caskets used by Shakespeare in The Merchant of Venice. You were mentioning Portia. Now,
Yes.
which is the other very interesting story that Shakespeare has used? So these tales reached Europe through the Crusades. Remember what I said? Arabia. Then there was a fight between Islam and Christianity, but there was also a lot of exchange. So a lot of Indian knowledge was transferred to Europe via the Crusades. So
Hmm.
there was someone called Petrus or Alfonsi who selected some of these tales and told them. Then there was somebody who took them to, okay, let me not give you all the details, but the interesting thing is that in Spain, the story of the man, his son, and their ass. Have you heard this story, Utkarsh? So
No.
there's a man and his son, and they have, in some cases, it's a donkey, in some cases, it's a horse, and they are walking along, holding the horse. They just bought the horse and they're walking along the road. So someone crosses by and says, how foolish you are. Why don't you sit on the horse? So this man says, okay, let my son sit on it. They go further. Someone says, oh my God, look at this. This young man is sitting on the horse while his old father is walking. Father should sit on the
Oh,
horse.
of
So
course I've
then,
heard the story. Of course I've heard the
yes.
story.
And they end up carrying the horse because
Yes. Yeah, I
they're
know
listening
this.
to everyone and they end up carrying the horse. Okay, so this story also comes from the Panchtantra. This story went to Spain. This story went again, it spread around Europe, and this story was part of the whole collection of stories which became very popular. So, this was used by Italians, notably Boccaccio. Boccaccio, then Decameron, then there was a book called The Palace of Pleasure, written by one William Painter. All these, and also Chaucer's tales. Let's not forget Chaucer's tales. They have, they are almost directly derived from the Brihatkatha tradition and the Panchtantra. So Shakespeare read all this, and a lot of it appears in Shakespeare. I told you about The Merchant of Venice, but I will tell you about a different one in detail. Do you remember the story of All's Well That Ends Well?
Vaguely, yes.
So there is this girl called Helena who is a young woman who is not very well born. She wants to marry a nobleman in the court. I think it's an Italian court. His name is Bertram. He doesn't care about her. He doesn't want to marry her. But anyway, she prevails on the count by saving his life from some illness that he forces Bertram to marry her. So he has to. But then he dumps her and goes away somewhere else. He goes away somewhere else. He finds someone he falls in love with, and he has told her that I will accept you only if you can show me a ring, my ring on your finger. And what she does is that she follows him there. She makes friends with the young woman he has fallen in love with. She substitutes herself for that young woman and has an affair with him. Then, when he comes back, she shows him his ring on her finger and she tells him the whole story. He's very impressed by her, and he finally ends up marrying her. Now, this is the story of All's Well That Ends Well. Where does this story come from? There is a figure, mythical figure called Mooldev or Kutakdev in Indian storytelling. He is the thief, con man, and he's like a con man extraordinaire. So he makes a fool of everyone. So when his story is that he marries a young Brahmin woman and she makes fun of him the first day that they meet each other because he doesn't know enough Sanskrit and she knows more than him. This also recurs. This is one of the original stories of the Satvahana king and his wife. So anyway, Muldev becomes very angry and says, I am not going to accept you till you come to me with my ring on your finger and my son in your arms. So isn't this an impossible task? But again, this woman is very smart. This is from where the tradition of smart, witty, intelligent women, resourceful women comes from. She follows him, she disguises herself, he falls in love with her, etc., etc. And again, she manages to come back with his ring on her finger and his son in her arms, and he accepts her for some time. So you see, this story of became Muldev became Bertram in an Italian court. And it's not only there. These stories, you have different types of these stories found in Morocco, found in Turkey. Again, I had showed you the map that Morocco, Turkey, Arabia, all of them are very close by. So Shakespeare, because of the influence of all these stories, because of the Italian, Spanish, etc. versions of it, was very familiar with these stories, and he used many of these elements in his different Shakespearean dramas. So the link between Shakespeare and the Brihat Katha tradition is often ignored, Utkarsh. And the
Hmm.
reason I got to know of it is because I was reading the Brihat Katha and my daughter was reading All's Well That Ends Well. And we were just kind of casually discussing it, and then this bulb suddenly came on in my mind that there has to be a connection. And then
Hmm.
I did find that connection, and I find that go to Wikipedia, and I dare you to find any connection between Shakespeare and Brihat Katha. Never, you will never, never, ever find it. So again,
Yeah.
Panchtantra, another very cute story is the tortoise and the hare.
Hmm.
This is also found across the board, where sometimes it becomes a snail and a mouse deer. Sometimes it becomes what? It becomes an elephant. Where does it become in Malaysia? It becomes a mouse deer and a king snail. And how does the snail make a fool of the deer? Because the deer cannot recognize different snails. The deer thinks all the snails are the same. So he positions different snails at different parts of the race and positions
I
one
see.
right at the end. So the mouse
Hmm.
deer is just stupid. So this is the Malaysian version. In the West African version, it is the chameleon and the elephant. In many
Hmm.
other places, you have you have this story in Sumatra, in Khmer, in Philippines, and in one place it also becomes an insect, daddy long legs.
Hmm.
So the stories change according to the wish of the storyteller, according to the place, but the elements remain the same. These are called motifs. And there is a very well authenticated library, so to speak, of motifs also. And these motifs are used and reused in many places. So then tell me that bold statement that I made about an hour ago, how convinced are you of that?
I think you should have led off with the 60%.
Okay. No, and I hope, I've told you also
Yeah,
some of
yeah.
the stories
Yeah.
and
No, it makes
some of the
sense. I
history
think
bits.
it ultimately goes back to the same thing that this particular part of the world was one of the first few places where you had a relatively advanced civilization, for whatever reason it might be. And a lot of stories, especially, have very, very ancient origins, which get adjusted over time to the context of
Yes,
whatever it might be in. So it
yes.
makes a lot of sense, right? It makes a
So
lot of
you
sense for.
remember when I talked to you about the Ramayana? So there's also a Muslim Ramayana which is called the Hikayat Sri Ram, where it is
Yeah.
Allah instead of Vishnu. And in these adaptations also, all
Hmm.
the Indian figures or Indian ideas have been changed into Islamic ones. And it's
Hmm.
because, Harun al-Rashid was a very famous Khalifa. And Baghdad was at the top of its powers during that time. So naturally, they would want to set it over there. And
Hmm.
people would like to hear stories set
Of course, it
in
goes
their
without
own
saying.
milieu, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we should enjoy all stories, but we should also kind of, give a nod to the people who originally thought of them. Of course, these
Hmm.
stories gain a lot as they go along, and everyone
Hmm.
contributes their own culture and their own ideas. So it's not about, kind of taking some kind of credit. It's not about that. It's just about understanding the context, understanding the roots, and giving the context of the spread of Indian culture across the world.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
That's what
Makes
this is
sense.
about.
Hmm. Absolutely. Good. This was interesting. And we also got the follow up, which I think is going to be a hit episode, the vampire bit. Uh,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
so we should do that soon as well.
yes. Okay. Vampires. Yeah, and then when we do the vampire bit, then we do a little more of the stories of Vikram and Betal, which are
Hmm. Hmm.
anyway
Hmm.
very popular. Do you remember any of them, Utkarsh, from
I
your
remember
childhood?
seeing something on TV, and I think the Betal guy looked
Oh,
quite
yeah,
weird.
yeah, 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 yeah. Very poor production values and very, very poor. When you were
Yeah.
a kid, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes,
In the
I remember
90s.
that. Yeah, I remember that. Terrible,
Hmm.
terrible. And no one has really made a very good Vikram or Betal abhi tak, in my
Hmm.
opinion. They haven't. But okay,
Hmm.
maybe
Hmm.
next time, as a follow-up to this, we do vampires.
Let's do
Yes,
that.
let's do that. Yeah. And as again, as usual, I will apologize for the sporadic nature of our episodes, but please bear with us. We try to do the best that we can, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Through renovations, moving countries, not really, not moving the country, but we try to do what we can.
But yeah, traveling and so many other things. But we try to do what we can, and we hope we entertain and inform you at the same time.
Hmm.
So do please give us a bump. And now we are going to give us a bump in terms of please more people subscribe and more
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
like. And
Hmm.
Utkarsh, we're going to start releasing shorts
Yes.
in a bit. So,
Yep.
we now have a good library of content over the past 1.5 years. And maybe it would be interesting for everyone to just have those shorts with more illustrations and more text.
Hmm.
It could be more to the point and perhaps more interesting. So we'll try to do that.
Yep. Great. Thanks for listening as always. Do give more comment. If you're on the borderline of about giving a comment, just give a comment. Just let us know what you think.
Yes, and again, one day I'm going to sit and answer all those comments. So I know there are outstanding comments, my bad, but I will sit and answer all of them. Utkarsh, the same goes for you.
Yes. As long as you, as long as I'm capable of answering them, I will absolutely do that.
All right
Good.
then.
All right.
Thank you
Take care.
and namaskar.